Welcome to World War II Begins, Part 1, an interactive U.S. history tutorial for students like you. Have you ever wanted to learn more about World War II? It's one of the most terrible but also dramatic and fascinating periods of history for the United States and the world. In this two-part tutorial, you'll learn how the ending of World War I laid the foundation for an even more horrible World War a generation later. You'll learn how dictators like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini rose to power in Europe at the same time as Imperial Japan tried to dominate the Pacific. You'll learn why the United States practiced isolationism even as the world turned to chaos, and how President Franklin D. Roosevelt nonetheless prepared his nation for war. And finally, you'll learn how the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor led the U.S. to join the Allies against the Axis powers. Ready? Let's begin. In order to fully understand World War II, we need to go back and review the ending of the First World War, a generation earlier. The conflict, then known simply as the Great War, lasted from 1914 to 1918. World War I pitted a group of nations known as the Allies against another group of nations known as the Central Powers. The Allies, seen on this map in green, included France, Great Britain, Italy, Japan, and for most of the war, Russia. The United States joined the Allied cause as well, but not until 1917. The Central Powers, seen here in orange, included Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. On November 11, 1918, the world's bloodiest war up until that point ended when Germany signed an armistice, a peace agreement with the Allies. As many as 17 million soldiers and civilians died in more than 4 years of fighting. At the time, World War I had been called the war to end all wars. America's President Woodrow Wilson had called it a war to make the world safe for democracy. Of course, neither of these claims proved to be true. In 1919, leaders from the winning Allied nations met in Paris to decide the terms of peace and to create the post-war world. First, the Allies assigned Germany the sole blame for the war, and then proceeded to disarm and weaken it so much that they thought Germany would never be able to threaten the world again. Second, the map of Europe was redrawn, creating new nations like Poland and Czechoslovakia, partly out of territory that had once belonged to Germany. Third, an international organization called the League of Nations was formed, in large part to prevent future world wars. The Treaty of Versailles, so called because it was signed in the Palace of Versailles outside of Paris, was a bitter pill to swallow for Germany and other nations on the losing side. Germany had surrendered, but it had not been defeated militarily in World War I, and most Germans found the peace terms vindictive and humiliating. The resentment would only grow in the years to come. And even some of the victorious allies, including Italy and Japan, found the Versailles Treaty insulting and unfair. Both nations believed that they deserved more territory than they ultimately received for being on the winning side of World War I. The Great War had been so bloody and destructive that even its winners, in a sense, were losers. Great Britain and France had both seen a generation of their young men dead or maimed. The result, leading into the 1920s and 30s, was a desire by those nations to avoid another war at almost any cost. The United States, for its part, refused to join the new League of Nations and deliberately stepped back from its new role as a world leader. Americans largely came to regret their nation's role in World War I and became increasingly isolationist. They didn't want to get involved in the problems of other nations. You can click on the cartoon to learn more about its message. Got all that? Let's review. Some of these statements are true, but others are false. Pick all the correct answer choices and then click Submit to check your work. Correct. The U.S., Britain, and France fought on the side of the Allies in World War I. Germany, which was on the losing side, was punished by the Treaty of Versailles. World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918, a generation earlier than the dates shown here. Click Continue to move on. In the 1920s, a disturbing new political trend arose in Europe: fascism. The term originated in a political party, the Fascist Party, that seized power in Italy in 1922. The party's leader was Benito Mussolini, a veteran of World War I. He was appointed Prime Minister of Italy after his fascist party took over the government, His people called him Il Duce, the leader. Mussolini believed that a strong man, a dictator, was needed to restore national greatness to Italy, which was still reeling from the war. Fascists believed in a military citizenship that blurred the lines between soldiers and civilians. The government should control every aspect of the lives of citizens to bring about order and stability, Mussolini believed, and citizens should live their lives not necessarily for their own happiness, but to further the aims of the government. Mussolini ruled Italy for more than 20 years as the totalitarian dictator of a one-party police state. Opponents of his rule were arrested or killed. In Germany, Adolf Hitler, also a military veteran, was inspired by Mussolini's success. He founded the National Socialist or Nazi Party in the early 1920s. Hitler's greatest desire was to rearm Germany and make it great again. He wanted revenge for the humiliation he felt his nation had suffered due to the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler was also motivated by his belief in racial purity and Aryan, white superiority. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler spoke openly of the Jewish peril and his dream to create a master race by eliminating Jews and others that he considered inferior. He spread lies, believed by many at the time, that German Jews had somehow stabbed Germany in the back in 1918 and caused it to lose the war. Early in his career, Hitler and the Nazis were treated as something of a joke in Germany. But over time, his power and appeal grew as his countrymen grew more and more desperate. Germans faced a crisis in the 1920s. Because Germany had been made responsible for paying the entire war debt for World War I, the nation's economy was a wreck. Skyrocketing inflation meant that people's money lost its value. And when the Great Depression brought economic disaster to the entire world in the early 1930s, Hitler was in a prime position to take advantage of ordinary Germans' fear, anger, and resentment. In 1933, what once seemed unthinkable happened. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Once in power, Hitler soon assumed the title of Führer and assumed the powers of a dictator. Germany was now under Nazi rule. You can click on the picture of the two men for more information about them. For this practice, make the right matches by dragging and dropping each answer choice to the right person, Hitler or Mussolini. Then click Submit. Right. Adolf Hitler ruled Germany beginning in 1933 as the Führer of the Nazi Party. Benito Mussolini ruled fascist Italy as Il Duce beginning in 1922. The entire world watched the political developments in Italy and Germany with fear and concern. From the ashes of World War I had sprung not world peace, but dangerous dictators who threatened renewed war. But it wasn't only Europe that was a threat to peace. In the early 20th century, the tiny island nation of Japan was a world power on the rise. To grow, Japan wanted and needed greater territory and resources. It gained both by invading and occupying its neighbors in the Pacific. On the surface, Japan claimed it was acting to restore Asia for Asians and remove Western colonial rule from the region. In reality, by controlling its neighbors, Japan was acting to create its own empire from which it would dominate the Asian continent and the Pacific Ocean. Japan was technically ruled by an emperor, Hirohito, but he was largely a figurehead, a ruler in name only. The real power behind the Japanese government in the 1930s was the nation's military. By the 1930s, Japan already controlled Korea and Taiwan, and its main rival in mainland Asia was China. In 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria, a province in northeastern China. In a telling sign, the invasion of Manchuria was ordered not by Japan's emperor, but by its generals. Japan and China were both members of the League of Nations, whose laws forbid aggressive actions like Japan's. But when China asked the League for help, it was powerless to intervene. The organization could only condemn Japanese aggression, and in response, Japan simply quit the League of Nations. Adolf Hitler was impressed. When he became chancellor, he followed the Japanese example by withdrawing Germany from the League of Nations as well. In 1937, Japan invaded China, leading to full-scale war in Asia. The Japanese captured the Chinese capital of Nanking and then brutally killed as many as 200,000 civilians.